Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Helena, aka No Justice MTG, and tonight I'm joined by Ash Sarkar. Ash, second Ladies' Night of the week. We're spoiling the viewers, aren't we?
It's Ladies' Night, the feeling's right, and are we wearing kind of matching tops? A little bit.
Very similar. Definitely very, very similar. We're definitely at least getting some amount of coordination going on here, which is a good start to the show, for sure, for sure. Speaking of which, coming up tonight, Trump says Israel's West Bank annexation won't happen. New polling shows that the wealth tax is gaining in popularity. KCL withdraws a student's visa sponsorship after pressure from a pro-Israel lobby group. And Zohran Mamdani and Andrew Cuomo clash in the final New York City mayoral debate. Stay tuned for all of that. But before we go to our first story, Ash, for those of us who don't know, and can you remind our viewers what happens every Friday morning?
Every Friday morning, I consider faking my own death to get out of the day to come. But then after that, you can receive my newsletter, The Cortado, in your inboxes. And we've got some really exciting developments in that regard. So Stephen Methven, who many of you will be familiar with, sometime of this parish, has taken on responsibility for writing the Cortado on Monday mornings. So he gets to do all of the weekend's news and Sunday papers. And I've got the luxury of taking everything that's happened Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday morning, trying to think about what I think one of the bigger stories in politics is and consolidate that all into a newsletter. So it's a hot take. You can now get it twice a week. And the best part is it's absolutely free. So even if you dislike it, how out of pocket are you really?
Make sure to sign up by heading to novara.media/thecortado or by following the link in the chat. Israel's parliament has voted to give the first round of approval to a bill imposing Israeli sovereignty on the occupied West Bank. This amounts to the annexation of the West Bank and is a clear violation of international law. Lawmakers voted 25-24 to advance the bill in the Knesset on Wednesday, approving in a preliminary reading to apply Israeli law to the territory Israel refers to as Judea and Samaria, which is the West Bank. This is the first of 4 votes needed to pass the bill into law, and it comes a month after US President Donald Trump said this.
I will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. No, I will not allow it. It's not going to happen.
Did you speak with Netanyahu about this directly?
Yeah, but I'm not going to allow it. Whether I spoke to him or not, I did. But I'm not allowing Israel to annex the West Bank. There's been enough. It's time to stop now, okay?
Seems pretty unequivocal to me. Trump reiterated this in a Time magazine interview last week, where he said, quote, Israel would lose all of its support from the United States if it went ahead with annexation. And US Secretary of State Marco Rubio didn't sound impressed when speaking to reporters as he boarded a flight to Israel.
That's a vote in the Knesset, but obviously I think the president's made clear that's not something we'd be supportive of right now, and we think it's even threatening to the peace deal. So they're a democracy, they're going to have their votes, people are going to take these positions, but at this time it's something that we think it might be counterproductive.
Israel's a democracy. I mean, there are votes that happen, but not everybody who is under Israeli control gets access to a vote now, do they? Again, it's weird how it's only one group here agreeing to the total annexation, including the territory, which includes other people. Wonder why that might be. The preliminary passage of the bill looks like an embarrassment for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who had reportedly tried to get lawmakers to delay being presented during Vice President J.D. Vance's visit. And in a statement, Netanyahu's Likud party called the votes for the annexation, quotes, another provocation by the opposition aimed at damaging our relations with the United States. But even more embarrassingly, one member of Likud actually voted in favour of the bill. And not only that, he cast the deciding vote. Some of Likud's partners in the current government coalition were also in favour of full annexation. No prizes for guessing, they were the far-right Jewish Power Party led by National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir and Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich's religious Zionist party. Following the vote, J.D. Vance had this to say.
Oh, yeah, that was weird. I was sort of confused by that. Now, I actually asked somebody about it, and they told me that it was a symbolic vote, some symbolic vote to recognize or a symbolic vote to annex the West Bank. I mean, what I would say to that is when I asked about it, somebody told me that it was a political stunt, that it had no practical significance. It was purely symbolic. I mean, look, if it was a political stunt, it was a very stupid political stunt, and I personally take some insult to it. The West Bank is not going to be annexed by Israel.
of a weird reaction there. Oh, it's a stunt. I mean, basically all of the people who have been part of the kind of the Zionist bloc within Israeli politics, the incredibly large one, it's the majority political opinion, they've always had their eyes set on what they call Judea and Samaria. This isn't weird. This is the broader goal of Zionism, is the full colonization of Palestine. So don't know why one would be surprised. Again, though, he's trying to pander to the MAGA base, who again turning slightly away from Israel, and there are certainly more pro-Palestinian voices on the right of politics in America right now, and he can't afford to lose those people in support. So something like the annexation of the West Bank would be something that he would want to paint as not being something that the government would let happen in the United States. Be that as it may, this potential annexation has been on the cards for a long time. Last month, Bezalel Smotrich unveiled his plan for absorbing 82% of the West Bank into Israel. He proposed leaving only 6 isolated enclaves outside of Israeli control and described the principle of the plan as taking control of maximum land with minimum Palestinian population. And in August, Netanyahu approved the construction of an incredibly controversial settlement project, the E1 plan, in the occupied West Bank. It means that 3,400 new housing units will be built in the West Bank, in a move that aims to connect existing illegal West Bank settlements with occupied East Jerusalem. The E1 plan was first designed in the 1990s, but it's widely considered a move that would kill a two-state solution, and its implementation has been delayed due to international opposition. And Netanyahu's cabinet has openly said they hope it does kill off the idea of a two-state solution. Smotrich said it represented the Palestinian state being erased from the table, not with slogans, but with actions. Israel's genocide in Gaza has emboldened illegal settlers in the West Bank, with at least 1,000 Palestinians killed and nearly 10,000 injured across the West Bank by IDF soldiers and armed settlers since the 7th of October 2023. Just this week, a 55-year-old Palestinian woman was taken to hospital after being clubbed over the head by a masked settler as she was picking olives. This attack happened in the Palestinian village of Termus Ayar, where at least 80% of its residents are US settlers. This year alone, at least 178 Palestinian deaths have been linked to settler and military violence in the occupied West Bank. Ash, is Israel at risk of the US money tapes being turned off after West Bank annexation?
Well, it depends what you mean by West Bank annexation. So I think that the facts that you laid out, which are the plans for further Israeli settlement, the emboldenment of violent Israeli settlers who, let's not forget, enjoy the protection and encouragement at times of the IDF. This is a form of slow annexation. What's happening is that Palestinians are being squeezed out of their land by both legal, in the sense of Israeli law, and illegal means. And that's a kind of annexation that both Britain and America have been remarkably comfortable with. So while there have been a couple of sanctions here and there against individuals from Britain, there's never been any real efforts diplomatically or in the form of applying economic pressure to stop Israel from expanding its settlements. Similarly, there has been no such interest from the United States. So a lot of the illegal land which has been seized by Israel, that's sold off at real estate auctions in the United States. It's allowed to take place out in the open. It's not exactly a secret. So that is a form of annexation that the establishment in the West are really comfortable with. The part that Trump and his cabinet are poo-pooing is one spectacular act of annexation and an acceleration of the process of ethnic cleansing. So it starts to resemble more like the kind of project of elimination and destruction that you saw in Gaza. So that's something that the US is saying, no, we're not going to countenance that. But I think that the distinction is, it's meaningful in terms of what kind of timescale you're looking at, but in terms of the big picture of what Israel's plans are for the West Bank and the intention of the West to stop it, it's not that meaningful at all.
One of the most harrowing and unforgettable moments in Israel's genocide in Gaza was the killing of 6-year-old Hind Rajab. Her family and the team of rescue workers who came to help her were all killed. Hind and her family were fleeing Gaza City when their car, a black Kia Picanto, was shelled by the IDF, killing everyone inside except for Hind and one of her cousins. Hind's teenage cousin called the Palestine Red Crescent Society emergency services begging for help and was then killed herself, leaving Hind alone in the car for hours. This was what was said when the emergency rescue team called back.
ايش يا عمري؟ يا حبيبتي يا عمري والله معك هيني أنا مش تاركك بحكي معاكي ما بدي أصلا أتركك. إيه؟ إيش؟
Her body was found 2 weeks later, alongside the bodies of 6 of her family members. The bodies of 2 paramedics who had been missing since the evening of the call when they were dispatched to rescue Hind were discovered in their ambulance about 50 metres away. The black Kia was riddled with 335 bullet holes, and forensic architecture investigation found that the shooter had a clear view of the car and its passengers, which means they knew the only people inside it were the 2 children and killed them anyway. This week, the Hind Rajab Foundation, set up in honour of the little girl's memory, has submitted an Article 15 filing to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. It names 24 Israeli soldiers and commanders responsible for the killing of Hind, her 6 family members and the 2 paramedics dispatched to rescue her on 29th of January 2024. The complaint names Colonel Benny Aharon, commander of the 401st Armoured Brigade, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Eller, commander of the 52nd Armoured Battalion, Major Sean Glass, commander of the Vampire Empire Company, and tank crew member Itay Kukiakov as directly participating in or facilitating the attack. Eller and Glass are believed to have been directly responsible for the killings. The Hind Rajab Foundation's legal team say that the killings amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity and genocide. Ash, pretty harrowing stuff there, but at least we're getting some closure, at least with these investigations. What do you think?
I don't know about you, but I find it really difficult to listen to those recordings. And the part that always gets me is when the little girl Hind says, I don't want to open my mouth because when I do, blood comes out and I'm going to make my shirt all dirty and my mum's going to have to wash it. I think there's something about that. And I know that this is going to sound like incredibly cliched, but like the humanity of that little girl and just how recognizable that worry is, right? We can all remember being a kid and worrying about getting your shirt dirty. That it just always makes me feel so enraged about the impunity with which the IDF operates. Now, I think that the investigation, the work of forensic architecture has been hugely important. And I hope that the men who are responsible for the killing of Hind Rajab and her family are brought to justice. I hope that they absolutely never see the light of day again and they have to live with the guilt of what they've done for a long time in a prison cell. That is what I hope for them. But I'm not confident about it. And the reason why I'm not confident about it is that, one, Israel is never going to enforce those arrest warrants. And 2, we've already seen people who've served in the IDF, who may well be material witnesses or participants in war crimes, travel freely to the UK and to the US. And there is an unwillingness on the part of our authorities to deal with it. So just if I can invite the audience to do a little exercise in compare and contrast, look at the level of police resources deployed to arrest those in Parliament Square and other parts of Westminster who've had signs saying, I support Palestine action. The full might of the state is mobilised to arrest those people, who I think all of us can agree, regardless of what you think about Palestine action and their tactics, they don't pose a harm to the public, right? You know, retired GPs holding signs do not pose a risk to the public. But people who may well have participated in war crimes, not only are they seemingly walking around going about their day completely untroubled by police, there is no signal from the political class in this country that they want to change anything about it. So there are going to be people in this country who witnessed and participated in war crimes, and not one part of our state apparatus wants to see them behind bars. And I just find that completely disgusting.
I remember a week before the election last year, Someone posted on Twitter and they said, what image will be in your mind when you go to vote next week? And you saw the usual Jacob Rees-Mogg lying in the House of Commons, or pictures of Grenfell Tower, or images from the austerity era. But in my mind, when I voted in 2024, it was the picture of Hind Rajab celebrating in school and knowing that I would never, ever again vote for any of the people who have been silent as Israel commits its crimes against the Palestinians. What do Gary Stevenson, Zach Polanski, and Renap Yorweth all have in common? They all support a wealth tax, a policy that's been gaining momentum as Rachel Reeves mulls over a litany of potential tax proposals in the upcoming November budget. The most prominent proposed tax is an annual tax of 1% on all assets over £10 million and 2% on all assets over £1 billion. It's a proposal that has been pilloried in the mainstream media. To quote just one example from establishment mouthpiece The Spectator, Polanski is talking nonsense about wealth taxes. The piece argues in the same stuff we've heard time and time again about wealth taxes. It will lead to all the wealthy people who would be impacted by the tax fleeing overseas to tax havens. And Matthew Bowles writes this: France tried almost exactly that, with a rate charged on individuals ranging from 0.5% to 1.5% on assets over 10 million euros. The outcome was not a revenue boom, but a mass exodus of the very taxpayers it targeted. Between 2000 and 2016, some 60,000 billionaires upped sticks. The Impôt de Solidarité sur la Fortune, ISF, or Solidarity Tax on Wealth, contributed just 2% of tax receipts during its lifespan. To add some context, there are currently almost 3 million billionaires in France, and in 2010 it was 1.7 million. The Spectator article quotes a period of 16 years for its supposed wealth exodus, which works out than less than 1% of the total millionaire population leaving. Hardly that much of an exodus now, is it? Almost amusingly, he even admits that it raised money. 2% of tax is roughly equivalent to half of our entire military budget in the UK. Not that anyone would care about what anyone from The Spectator thinks. The mainstream media are always well out of step with what the consensus of the public, especially those who haven't been given the privilege of a private education like the majority of the UK's journalists. And now we have some actual data on what the public think should be a priority in terms of tax reform. Pollster YouGov asked 2,100 people whether they support or oppose a variety of tax reforms suggested by various politicians and economists, and the most popular policy by far was the Green Party's wealth tax, with a whopping 75% in support and only 12% opposing, with support from voters from all 5 major political parties. Given the wall-to-wall derision the policy has received in the press, this shows that one can only manufacture so much consent. People can see that inequality is a huge problem in our society, and it is necessary to fix it. So much so, in fact, that in a follow-up question in which YouGov asked respondents if they still supported the tax, even if it were to lead to enough capital flight that would mean a net loss to the Treasury, a plurality of respondents still supported it. Now, this is important. As was pointed out by Zach Polanski when speaking with Victoria Derbyshire last weekend, we don't necessarily need a wealth tax to engage in capital investment, given that the UK is a sovereign currency issuer. Additional revenue is always welcome, but the key goal of this policy is to have a more equitable distribution of assets by encouraging asset hoarders to liquidate them. Now, it wasn't just wealth taxes that YouGov asked about. If we go back to their poll, there are some other pretty good ideas here that are worth exploring. I spoke about on last week's show about how council tax reform, which also has majority support. But there are also majority support for an exit tax at 39% support. A mansion tax gets over 49% support, that's positive support that is, and a Reform UK proposal that would add a 5% surcharge on employer national insurance contributions for foreign workers to incentivise firms to employ British people first before looking to poach workers from overseas also had support there too. Now, when it comes to an exit tax, this is something I really support. All of the talk of capital flight very specifically being the biggest thing that people have concerns with over taxation on the rich. Well, if they want to leave, then you have to tax them on unrealised capital gains before they do, meaning that we will be able to disincentivize those from leaving because the tax bill will be too high for them to leave. Stay domiciled here, make sure they keep paying taxes here as well. And I actually do support the Reform UK proposal there as well. It doesn't stop anybody from wanting to come here and being employed, and it doesn't place the burden upon those migrants themselves. What it does mean, though, is that employers can't use international labour. They can't poach international labour from other countries that also need it without paying that surcharge. And on top of this, it does mean that they're incentivised to look at British people first and then to consider people from overseas who would still be able to do so if they had a work visa. Reeves, however, has not, it seems, as of yet considered most of the taxes proposed here. In true Starmerite fashion, she's not going after those with the broadest shoulders, but has briefed the press that the target is yet again potentially going to be the disabled. Reeves is reportedly considering ending VAT exemption on the Motability scheme and ending inclusive insurance for Motability users in the hope of clawing back roughly £1 billion for the Treasury. The Motability scheme is a charity that provides new vehicles for the disabled on lease, which those who are entitled to a variety of disability payments can access if and only if they qualify for the enhanced mobility elements of those payments. In layman's terms, if they can prove that they have significant mobility issues, then they can use the extra welfare that they receive from that qualification on a leased car from Motability. So it's an option that you can use that enhanced payment for. It's not like a specific thing that you qualify for on its own. It's a lifeline for many disabled people in ensuring their personal freedom, especially since disability payments like PIP are not an out-of-work benefit, and making it increasingly unaffordable for them will only pile an extra burden upon those who already have significant extra needs. Reeves has essentially been convinced by this because it's been a bugbear of the crank right for a while. Here's something Shadow DWP Minister Helen Whately posted on Twitter today.
I've just forced the government to reveal how much they're spending on the Motability scheme. It's more than £3 billion of taxpayer cash this year alone. That's £300 million more than last year, a shocking increase in government spending. It's clear Motability has spiralled out of control. It was set up so disabled people could get around, but now people are getting free cars for acne and ADHD. And 1 in 5 new cars are Motability cars. That's not fair and that's not affordable. But we have a plan. Limit Motability to people with serious disabilities only and stop tax breaks for luxury cars. It's time to get benefits under control. Welfare should be a safety net, not a lifestyle choice.
Right, so there's a few things there that are just like abject lies, okay? Like just complete lies. First of all, when it comes to the expenditure on Motability, that all comes out of the money the government would already be spending on the higher rate of mobility payment for things like PIP in England, for example, right? Like, you don't qualify for anything extra by being a Motability recipient. That's just an option that you have if you qualify for that higher rate payment. You can use that on something else if you want. You have the option of using Motability. If the Motability scheme was completely closed tomorrow, the expenditure of the government would not change because it is that higher mobility payment, higher rate mobility payment that is what is important here, and that's what the expenditure is on. When it comes to the eligibility, you have to pass an incredibly grueling and degrading assessment to prove that you have the serious mobility problems that require that higher payment in the first place just to qualify, right? So no one is going to get a qualification for a free car from the state because they have acne or because they have ADHD or anxiety, right? You have to prove to the people who are doing your assessment that you have significant mobility issues, enough for the higher rate that warrants being able to have access to this money and then potentially the Motability scheme if you want to use it. When she says, make sure it's for serious disabilities only, that is quite literally already the case. And the reason why 1 in 5 new cars are being sold as Motability is because fundamentally, people can't really afford to buy new cars anymore. The number of new cars being sold into the regular market is lower than it was before the pandemic. And since the pandemic, that's the cost of living crisis. That means people's expenditure that they have access to means that they can't afford to buy new cars, or fewer people can afford to buy new cars. Motability is a godsend, in fact, for broadly our automotive industry in this country, is because it's a way of being able to ensure that there is a steady stream of cars being bought new and then being sold to dealerships to be sold on secondhand to regular people in the country, right? You get a 3-year lease on Motability cars. And so you'll keep refreshing that as people continue to get access to new vehicles. I mean, the Motability scheme provides this consistent expenditure on new cars that then make sure that we have a second-hand market that can cope with demand. So it's just all either misdirection, nonsense, or abject lies that she's saying there. But what this has been is an example of what has been known as posting to policy, where blue-check Twitter accounts will post incessantly about a certain subject until terminally online politicians take note and support it once it gains enough attention. If you want an idea on how these kinds of people want the disabled to be treated, here's a suggestion from GB News opinion spewer Tom Harwood from one of his many, many, many tweets about the subject of motability. Make all the free cars the government gives out to people with autism or ADHD look like this, and see how many people really need to claim them. Like, at the point at which we are forcing people who need to rely on state help to be able to deal with things such as mobility issues that most people in this country don't have. These are very serious things. As I said, you need to qualify for a very stringent, a very high level of mobility payment to even get access to Motability in the first place. And then saying, if you want to do that, you have to mark yourselves out as a disabled person, and not with a small blue badge or something that lets people know so that they can take care, by emblazoning Motability on the side of a car, and we'll choose an ugly Fiat multiplier as well, just so we can try and humiliate the people who have access to this stuff. It's pure politics of envy, something that the right throw at the left all the time when it comes to things like us wanting to have higher wages. But in fact, it's really politics of envy because it's people who somehow think that they've missed out because there's this mythical cohort of disabled people who are getting things that they shouldn't be getting access to. But in reality, they're just jealous. Why would you be jealous though? Like, disabled people have a really tough lot in life. They really go through a lot of stuff. And not only do they have to deal with all of the conditions that they have for being disabled, they then have to deal with all of the actual hoops they have to jump through from the state to get access to any help at all, which is a degrading and humiliating process. And then they have to deal with people like Tom Harwood who want to humiliate them in public because they feel that they are getting something that they shouldn't have access to. It's pure envy. Ash, why do these people relentlessly go after the disabled?
Well, look, I think you kind of answered the question yourself. So I'm going to try and add to what you've said rather than try and replace it or augment it in any way. I mean, what's going on is that there is a feedback loop, which is the pursuit of policies which disproportionately harm working class people, disabled people, people who have vulnerabilities in any kind of way. Those policies include austerity, the disastrous Andrew Lansley era NHS reforms, gutting local authorities of money, in particular the money that goes towards adult social care, pursuing reckless policies of privatization and outsourcing. So it makes the delivery of these services absolutely extortionate. I mean, one thing that people are right about is that there are savings that could be made in public spending. It's just you make those savings by insourcing rather than forking out to private equity-owned care homes and the like. But I digress. You pursue all of these policies, which have resulted in a poorer, less healthy country where people who may have had, a serious condition may now present with 2, 3, or even 4 comorbidities as well because of these policy decisions. And then you go, oh, look, the welfare bill's really high. Well, yeah, because you've created a less healthy, less enabled society. Of course, that's going to be more on the welfare bill. And so then you punish people for being the consequence of your very own policy decisions. And the reason why they don't want to do that is because they don't want to tackle the absolutely hideous levels of inequality that we've seen over the past few decades. And I think that this is an important point to hammer down, which is that the kind of inequality that we have isn't simply the result of a sort of, natural consolidation of wealth that's been happening organically. Of course, that's a part of it. The tendency towards monopoly is something which is inherent to capitalism. But there have also been some really significant policy interventions to make that happen. So selling off of council housing was one way of transferring public wealth into private hands. A significant number of council houses that were sold off under right to buy are now operated as buy-to-let by landlords. You also have forms of wealth transfer which take place in that very outsourcing and privatization that I discussed before. You have work being taxed disproportionately, especially when you compare it to inheritance and especially when you compare it to investment as well. These are all things which turbocharge the inequality that we live with. And I think that this loops back to the thing that you were saying about wealth taxes, Helena, which is we're constantly being told if the multi-millionaires and billionaires leave, society's fucked. Well, let's just have a look at the society we have, where we have seen a massive growth in the wealth of billionaires, the number of billionaires we have, and a growth in the multi-millionaire class as well. Now, what we have also seen alongside the growth of the billionaire and multi-millionaire class is low productivity, falling standards of living, flatlining wages, crumbling public services, and deepening regional inequality. So we're being told, well, having millionaires and billionaires is really, really good for you. And sure, when you look at the amount that they're able to contribute to HMRC, contribute an amount which is pretty high, but they are choking the life out of other areas of the economy. So I think one of the mistakes that we have sometimes made on the left is that we've talked about the economy and what needs to happen purely through the lens of tax. And actually, the kinds of change that we need to see are far, far bigger. And we shouldn't just talk about, making savings when it comes to public expenditure as though it's a right-wing thing and the only way you can do it is by punishing disabled people. No, part of how you do that is stop letting private equity run key parts of state provision. That's one way in which you can save on public expenditure.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think Labour in the run-up to the election promised the biggest wave of insourcing in a generation. Where did that go? I was actually watching Politics Live on stream the other day, and they had a disabled guy who was eligible for Motability on the show, and he specifically said, my claim was dealt with by Capita. They misassessed me because they didn't do the assessment properly, meaning I lost my entitlements, and I had to go for 2 months without, and I had to go through a whole load of litigation to try and get that back, given the terrible job that they'd done. So not only are our outsourcers, responsible for extra money the state has to spend on directorial salaries and shareholder dividends, which wouldn't need to if it was insourced, they also do a worse job because they don't have any kind of democratic accountability because they only have an interest in profit because they're a private company. And it is the government themselves who are trying to ensure that they don't have democratic accountability either because they can just blame the outsourcer instead. It's a vicious cycle that just leads us with worse outcomes over and over and over again, and we're having to pay extra for the privilege as well. But yet another privatization success story. Before we go to our next story, 10 of Novara Media's videos have been selected by the British Film Institute for inclusion in its National Archive, reflecting the contribution the organisation has made to UK media in its 14 years of existence. And these are those videos. Cops Off Campus, Jeremy Corbyn, Things Are Not Going to Be the Same in 2020, The Unbearable Whiteness of Brexit, Grenfell, Gaza and the Royals with Loki, Billionaires Control the Media and It's Destroying Democracy, Are Bankers Scared of Corbyn? We Asked Them, Ash Sarkar, Ex-Extinction Rebellion, Love Bomb the Cops, YouTube Shut Us Down Without Explanation, Sit Down, Relax, Have a Holiday, Welcome to Being a Landlord, and Corbyn's Revenge, an election night to remember. The BFI said this: It has been a joy to work with Novara Media on selecting videos from the ever-growing body of contemporary online reporting to preserve in the new BFI National Archive online collection. We were keen to make sure an online voice that was growing and offered a counter-perspective to mainstream news and traditional political journalism was represented. These selected videos capture key political moments and recent debates that have resonated with audiences. Contemporary online video is fragile and at risk. Historically, online videos have been underrepresented, and we are in the process of addressing this gap. Novara Media's work is an important contribution towards this. All of the videos selected by the BFI took a huge amount of dedication from the Novara Media team. And none of it would have been possible without our supporters, that's you at home. If you're a supporter already, thank you. If not, please support us today. Ash, you've been a seminal figure in the Novara Media back catalogue. How does that make you feel knowing you're going to be immortalised in the BFI archive?
Oh, it makes me really wish that I'd chosen different outfits and hairstyles for some of those videos, but what can you do now? It makes me feel really, really proud of the work that we've done. And I went back and I rewatched some of those videos. And one, I was just struck by how young we all were. Two, one of the things that really stood out to me is that part of the reason why the content we were making didn't look like anybody else's is because we didn't get taught how to do this stuff. So there was this real experimental spirit, particularly in those earlier years of Novara, where we were just throwing things at the wall and trying to see what stick. And I think that it was constantly a surprise to us that there was an audience that was, vast and varied and international for the things that we were saying. When we started, I think we had in our heads that our audience was going to be, a couple of hundred anarchists in Southeast London. But I think that because of the sort of political analysis that was at the heart of the project and still is at the heart of the project, which is that politics will remain in crisis for as long as the status quo is an economic model which simply doesn't work for most people. Because that has been the kernel, the jewel at the heart of every single piece of content, I think it's resonated with far more people than we could have ever anticipated at the start of the project. So I feel so proud of the project. I feel so proud of all the people that have been a part of building it. I think all the time also about some of our newer hires, the people who have come onto the team who are just hugely talented, dedicated people, who are bringing something new, who are showing us new ways of doing things, who are helping us improve and iterate and refine what we're doing. And hopefully in the next 10 years to come, we're going to see many more pieces added to the BFI's archive, and hopefully I'll have better hair in some of them.
I absolutely agree on all of that, apart from one thing. I will not accept 2010's Ash Sarkar slander. Ash Sarkar in 2010s was drippy as fuck. Let's be real.
I think it was just because I had that thing where I was in my mid-20s and I was like, time to invent a persona for myself. Whereas now I realize the persona is just be comfortable. Loose, elastic waistbands. That's the persona.
Okay, I'll accept that answer. A Novara Media exclusive has found that a prestigious Russell Group university, King's College London, has indefinitely suspended a student for pro-Palestine activism on campus after pressure from a pro-Israel lobby group. An indefinite suspension means the student in question, a 21-year-old Osama Ghanem, will have his visa withdrawn and be sent back to his home country of Egypt. Crucially, King's College London were aware that Osama and his immediate family members had previously been imprisoned and tortured in Egypt for speaking out against the regime. The university also knew that Osama had a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder due to his treatment in Egypt, and that he was at risk of further mistreatment if he was sent back there. Osama is now taking King's College London to court for alleged breaches of his human rights, assault and personal injury, discrimination and harassment. King's College London told Novara Media that it is inaccurate to suggest that an investigation commenced after a single complaint. A KCL spokesperson also said this. The university is committed to upholding and protecting freedom of expression and to right to protest within the law, and we take proportionate action when behaviour breaches our policies, decided upon through our robust processes and procedures. Earlier today, I spoke to Novara Media's own Harriet Williamson about her exclusive. I started by asking Harriet if KCL were engaging in deliberate endangerment.
Yeah, it certainly looks like it. And King's College London's decision to indefinitely suspend Osama certainly has endangered him, whether deliberately or not. I couldn't say, but Osama was in a uniquely vulnerable position as an international student from overseas. He has obviously, as many international students do, given a great deal of money to the university in order to be able to study there, or taken on a great deal of debt for the future to be able to get a degree from such a prestigious institution. And if this was a British resident student we were talking about who had received an indefinite suspension, yes, it's an incredibly harsh sanction, but they would go back to their home in the UK. Osama, in this case, will have his student visa withdrawn and he will have to go back to Egypt, where he, his brother and his father, who sadly is no longer alive, were all imprisoned and tortured for speaking out against the Egyptian regime. Osama said to Novara Media that he knows what it's like to live in authoritarian societies. He lived in both Egypt and Saudi Arabia, and he compared the actions of King's College London to those authoritarian regimes. And he said that the behaviour of King's was straight out of the Trump playbook. So Osama was vulnerable because of where he was from and as an international student. King's knew that. Osama wrote openly in his statement to King's when he applied to the International Relations course, saying that his father and brother had been tortured in Egypt and that he himself taken part in a great deal of sort of political activism, political documentary making, and that he wanted to get a political education in order to make the world a better place. They didn't think that Osama was this sort of wilting wallflower apolitical student who wouldn't get involved in campus activism. And they also knew that Osama had a PTSD diagnosis from the really, really shocking and violent treatment that he'd been subjected to by the Egyptian authorities. So, yeah, deliberate endangerment. From where I'm standing, it doesn't look like King's have behaved in the best interests of their own students. I think a criticism of King's could be here that they have actually behaved in the interests of the pro-Israel lobby rather than the students that come to their own institutions to learn, like Osama.
Can you expand upon the role of the pro-Israel lobby in this story?
So the part of this story that actually feels really egregious is that Osama was sanctioned 3 times for pro-Palestine activism on campus. The first one was for protesting the King's Alumni Awards ceremony, and that was in the summer of last year, of 2024. And for that, he was excluded from campus under emergency powers. He was also excluded from campus under emergency powers again for protesting the London Defence Conference in the spring of this year, 2025. And those events were far higher profile than the event that he protested in February of this year that actually got him the most serious sanction, which is the indefinite suspension. That one was quite a small panel discussion between 2 people. It's about Iranian-Israeli relations, and it was held in like a standard-sized lecture theatre and only attended by about 40 people. Like, it wasn't particularly high profile. It had a fairly controversial speaker. It was a pro-Israel Iranian policy researcher whose social media presence is quite contentious in like how much she supports Netanyahu. I've spoken to the people who are part of the Iranian diaspora in this country, and they say that her views are quite fringe. This was a small event. Some students protested. The 2 people on the panel walked out of the room very quickly. They did not engage with protesters. Security came into the room. The event was cancelled in about 25 minutes. There was some chanting. Everyone went home. That's as far as we know it. But Campaign Against Anti-Semitism wrote a letter following this event to the leadership of King's College London, and that letter was seen by Novara media. Campaign Against Anti-Semitism called the incident to be investigated and for the university to take action against the students involved. This feels like pressure, it feels like interference, and what we know about Campaign Against Anti-Semitism is that it's led by somebody called Gideon Faulkner, who in April last year attempted to spark some sort of confrontation at a national march in solidarity with the people of Palestine while they're suffering a genocide at the hands of Israel. And Faulkner put out a bit of a misleading video saying that he hadn't been allowed to walk through the march because he was wearing a kippah, a Jewish skull cap, and he looked openly Jewish. Now, that interaction with a Met officer was actually found to be part of a much longer conversation that they had, where Faulkner seemed like he really wanted to be there to cause a bit of trouble. And the stance from the police when these great big marches for Palestine happens is that counter protesters aren't supposed to be mixed in with protesters. They're supposed to be kept separate. And that was why this Met officer wasn't particularly sure about Gideon Faulkner being able to just walk through the March for Palestine. And he sort of made it seem like, in fact, he very much did make it seem like Jewish people would not be welcome in the National March for Palestine, which is absolutely not true. And we know this because every time there is one, there's a very large Jewish bloc. There are people in Orthodox Jewish dress, plenty of people wearing skull caps. Some of them are like knitted to resemble watermelons, which is a symbol of Palestinian solidarity. And if you go on one of these marches, you will be walking side by side with your Jewish brothers and sisters who don't believe that the people in Gaza should be bombed, starved, or have crimes against humanity committed against them by the state of Israel. And, you know, people like Gideon Faulkner, who leads the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, and This is an organisation that has been called overly politicised. It says it's a charity, but it gets involved in political matters. It's vexatious. It feels, this action of Gideon Faulkner's last year, it feels really misleading and about stoking fear within the Jewish community rather than keeping them safer in Britain. These are the pro-Israel organisations that are interfering in British public life. And I think that is what this story, that's something that this story really pulls out for us, is that these lobbying organisations have a great deal of power in that they can put pressure on institutions and sort of get what they want out of it. Kings, of course, says that it would be inaccurate to suggest that after one complaint, this decision was made. But I think people can draw their own conclusions over whether there was influence there.
And when it comes to King's College London, you said that one of their conflicts of interest here is the investments and the endowments they have that are related to Israel. Can you tell us more about those?
According to the King's College London BDS Forum, King's has about 20 million invested in companies complicit in Israeli apartheid, surveillance and illegal occupation. And a lot of these companies are the ones that were name-checked in Francesca Albanese's UN report about companies who have actually profited from the machinery of genocide since October 2023. Now, King's says it's got an ethical investment policy, but a lot of places say that, and I'm not sure in a lot of cases it actually means that much. And as of last summer, in a win for the King's Gaza Solidarity encampment on campus, King said it would no longer be investing in companies that make controversial weapons. Now, in this instance, controversial weapons means things like cluster bombs, landmine, depleted uranium weapons, and chemical and biological weapons. It doesn't mean the regular weapons that have been widely used in Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza, which has gone on for 2 years now, and a fragile ceasefire is, just about staying together, even though Israel continued to violate it loads of times. But apparently that's not real violations of the ceasefire because it's Israel doing it. But yeah, King says it's got this ethical investment policy, but it still invests in companies that make conventional weapons. And this is a key point because it is the conventional weapons that have killed a conservative estimate of 68,000 people in Gaza over the last 2 years. It's not these controversial weapons, really. F-35, an F-35 jet is a conventional weapon. It's not a controversial one. And I think that one thing about this story that I'd really like to pull out for our viewers here is that students have historically been incredibly sort of active and vocal for a lot of progressive causes. Students often have very strong moral compasses because they kind of have less to lose in that they don't have like a career or a mortgage yet. They're getting all sorts of ideas at uni that they're exploring. They tend to be quite like politically radical and idealistic. So it's not a surprise to anybody that students feel really strongly about what Israel's been doing in Gaza over the last 2 years and for decades previously. But what perhaps is a bit of a surprise is that the unis themselves seem kind of shocked by it. And they kind of don't know how to react unless it's in a really authoritarian way. And that's what we've seen from King's. Like King's revised the rules on campus protests to outlaw any protest they assess to be intentionally causing an intimidating environment. And that was after the campus. They rewrote their rules. And who is assessing whether something is creating an intimidating environment? Who is assessing whether a protest is disruptive or not? A protest that's disruptive, I wager, is a protest that isn't really working. Now, and you've got King's in this case actually paying a private investigation company called B360 to look into Osama and compile an 18-page report on his activities. And, this is before he says he was even asked to give his side of things. And the use of emergency powers against him. I think that King's comes off as incredibly authoritarian here and not really being bothered about the well-being of students like Osama when we think about the information that they had about him and about the risks to him if his student visa was withdrawn and he would have to go back to Egypt, and the fact that they rejected his appeal against the indefinite suspension anyway.
That was Novara's Harriet Williamson speaking to me earlier today. Her exclusive article will be linked for you down there in the description. I highly, highly, highly recommend you go and read it. It's a very important story, that one. With the New York City mayoral election hurtling towards its conclusion, insurgent candidate and Democratic Socialist Zohran Mamdani went up against Republican Curtis Sliwa and Democrat-turned-independent Andrew Cuomo in the last televised debate, and sparks flew between all three candidates. First up was a heated exchange over Mamdani's flagship policy of freezing the rent for New York City's rent-stabilized tenants.
Zohran said the tenant doesn't have to pay more rent, but we're going to cover the landlord's costs. No, you can't do both, and that's not what happened. We did freeze the rent with de Blasio. We lost units because the landlords took them off the market because you weren't covering their costs. The reason the Rent Guidelines Board went up after the freeze was because you had to make up for all the backlog of costs. And this, I'm going to freeze the rent. People think it applies to all of them. No, just the 25% of units that are rent stabilized. And by the way, it's all BS because the mayor doesn't have the power to do it anyway. The Rent Guidelines Board does, and he doesn't control the Rent Guidelines Board. So nothing is going to happen. It's all this. It's just more political blather.
Mr. Mamdani, you can respond.
If you want a candidate for mayor who tells you everything that he cannot do, then Andrew Cuomo should be your choice. If you want a candidate for mayor who will use every tool at their disposal, including the 9 appointees at the Rent Guidelines Board, all of whom are appointed by the mayor, then I am the candidate for you.
But what if the costs for the landlord goes up? Oh, heavens no, someone call the police. I mean, at the end of the day, landlords are already getting somebody else to pay their mortgage for them. I really do not care if they don't make an overall profit outside of the free house that their tenant is buying them. I really do not have any concern. And again, Mamdani's response was perfect, insofar as there is so many things that Andrew Cuomo thinks are just beyond the scope of what a mayor can or can't do because he is fundamentally bought out by so many important capitalist lobby groups, such as the landlord lobby, for example. And the only way of getting actual policy that fights for working people is to have somebody who doesn't have vested interests like Mamdani. Next up, Cuomo again went on the attack, this time over Mamdani's opposition to Israel's genocide in Gaza, which caused 650 rabbis to sign a letter denouncing Mamdani's candidacy.
You won't denounce globalize the intifada, which means kill Jews. There's unprecedented fear in New York. It was not several rabbis, Errol. It was 650 rabbis who signed the letter, not several.
Let me ask you a related question, Mr. Cuomo. Many New Yorkers have serious grievances with Israel and the way the Israeli government under Benjamin Netanyahu has conducted the war in Gaza and expanded settlements in the West Bank. What would you say to and how would you handle New Yorkers who are in the streets, if you were mayor, protesting the actions of the Netanyahu government?
Fine. That's your right. Protest, demonstrate, disagree. God bless America. God bless New York City. And there is no doubt that there's two sides on what's going on and the passions are very high. That doesn't justify anti-Semitic behavior in New York. It doesn't justify having a Jewish population that feels unprotected in New York. It doesn't justify leaders who stoke the flames of hatred against Jewish people, which is what Zohran does, in my opinion.
And even Curtis Sliwa went on the attack against Mamdani over his support for Palestine.
Zohran, this is personal for me. I know you are under threat. The mother of my 2 youngest sons who are raised Jewish, Melinda Katz, is prosecuting this person who came up and tried to do you harm. But let me speak on behalf of my 2 sons. When they've heard some of the statements you've made, like in support of global jihad, and I hear some people out there saying that Jews, their time is due, which means the same thing. They're frightened, they're scared. They view you as the arsonist who fanned the flames of anti-Semitism. They cannot suddenly accept the fact that you're coming in like a firefighter and you're going to put out these flames. You've got a lot of explaining to do, a lot of apologizing to do. My sons are afraid. Their family, their friends, many in the Jewish community are concerned if you become mayor because they don't think when anti-Semitism rears its ugly head, which it's now doing more than ever before, that you will have the ability to come in and put out those flames of hate.
Okay, yeah, you can.
I think there is room for disagreement on many positions and many policies, but I also want to correct the record. I have never, not once, spoken in support of global jihad. That is not something that I have said, and that continues to be ascribed to me, and frankly, I think much of it has to do with the fact that I am the first Muslim candidate to be on the precipice of winning this election. Now, all the same, Curtis, I do still want to be the mayor that will keep your sons safe, that will keep every single New Yorker safe. And it is my job to not only deliver on that commitment, but also to ensure that New Yorkers feel it every single day that they live in this city.
So I'll tackle those claims in reverse order. First of all, he's right. He has never, ever talked about global jihad. That has come out of complete nowhere. That is from left field. And as far as I can see, Mamdani is absolutely right to ascribe it to Islamophobia. It's the only way that you can think, you look at a Muslim man and go, well, this guy supports jihad. Second of all, when it comes for Jewish people being scared about Mamdani's candidacy, he is currently polling first amongst Jewish New Yorkers. So that kind of puts paid to that idea that they're trying to smear him with over his support for Palestine and the things that he said. Speaking of which, one of the things that he's being pilloried by Cuomo, therefore, is this idea that he has not condemned the phrase global intifada. He's never said it himself, he just doesn't personally condemn it. And Andrew Cuomo says that it means kill Jews, which it doesn't. It fundamentally does not. During the first intifada, the people of Palestine engaged in non-violent direct action, strikes, boycotts, protests, exactly the same things, exactly the same tactics that were used in the boycott campaign against apartheid South Africa that brought down the apartheid regime there. It is because of the first intifada that we had the Oslo Accords. It was the first time, because of the heavy-handed nature of Israel's brutal repression of that non-violent resistance, that we actually got some form of sympathy for the Palestinian people. It was the first point at which there was Western sympathy for the Palestinians broadly that led to the Oslo Accords, right? Global Intifada is about resistance. It's about resistance to Israel, its illegal apartheid regime, and its illegal occupation of the Palestinian people. That is fundamentally it, right? Global Intifada doesn't need to be condemned. Global Intifada is a moral necessity, right? Just because people did bad things during the second Intifada doesn't mean that the fundamental thing, which Intifada is what it means, which is to shake off, right, is a bad thing. It is fundamentally a good thing to resist apartheid, to resist genocide, and to resist illegal occupation. The most heated moment of the night came during a free-form cross-examination from the candidates, where Zohran dropped this nuclear payload on Andrew Cuomo.
Mr. Cuomo, in 2021, 13 different women who worked in your administration credibly accused you of sexual harassment. Since then, you have spent more than $20 million in taxpayer funds to defend yourself, all while describing these allegations as entirely political. You have even gone so far as to legally go after these women. One of those women, Charlotte Bennett, is here in the audience this evening. You sought to access her private gynecological records. She cannot speak up for herself because you lodged a defamation case against her. I, however, can speak. What do you say to the 13 women that you sexually harassed?
If you want to be in government, then you have to be serious and mature. There were allegations of sexual harassment. They were then went to 5 district attorneys, fully litigated for 4 years. The cases were dropped, right? You know that as a fact. So everything you just said was a misstatement, which we're accustomed to from you.
Everything that I stated was a misstatement?
Yes, because the cases were dropped. That's what happened. And my question to you, you still didn't answer, why won't you say BDS against Uganda for saying gays should be imprisoned for being gay? Okay. You have no problem with BDS against Israel, but no BDS for Uganda.
A pretty bizarre and ridiculous reaction from Cuomo there. Oh, you're bringing up the credible accusations of sexual harassment against me. You need to be mature and serious. I mean, this is the level to which that we take sexual harassment of women broadly in the Anglosphere at the level of seriousness that we treat it with, you know? Really kind of damning indictment on Cuomo there. No apology, no nothing. And second of all, right? Homophobia is bad. Imprisoning gay people obviously is bad. No one is going to dispute this in terms of Uganda, right? Is it worse than genocide, Andrew? Is it worse than genocide? I don't think so. It seems that Andrew Cuomo was pretty rattled by Zohran in that debate. So much so, in fact, that his team posted something absolutely outrageous on social media. Take a look at this in its full majesty.
Zohran Mamdani's opponents want you to believe he's an inexperienced radical whose policies will make New York City more dangerous. But what do his actual supporters think?
Mamdani isn't crazy. He's just trying to even the playing field.
You know, give everyone a fair shot. Sure, he said multiple times we need to defund the police, but that was just a metaphor.
And yes, he did say crime is a social construct, but that was also a metaphor.
His main backer, the Democratic Socialists' ideas are common sense, such as
Decriminalizing misdemeanors, like shoplifting.
Third-degree assault. Trespassing. Prostitution.
And drunk driving.
With plans to decriminalize all drugs, Mamdani will be a job creator for drug dealers.
Instead of helping us homeless get off the streets and into the mental health facilities we need, he wants to give us safe injection sites to do crack and let us sleep in subway carts.
These are actual policies Mamdani and the DSA want to implement on day one.
When a woman's being domestically abused, she finally won't have to deal with some pesky cop to arrest the abuser, but now a social worker to help, kumbaya the situation.
Breathe in, breathe out.
Mamdani is finally lowering jail sentences. Guilty!
But Mamdani says you're free to go.
Woo-hoo!
Who cares if legalizing prostitution statistically leads to an increase for sex trafficking of women and young girls by 70%?
You can't have safety without equality.
For unlawful abiding citizens like us, globalize the intifada.
I'm a criminal. I'm a criminal. I'm a criminal.
I'm a criminal.
Yep. I'm a criminal.
For Zohran.
For Zohran Mamdani.
I didn't have a real job until I was 30, but sure, give me the keys to the city. What's the worst that can happen?
Paid for by Cuomo for NYC.
Now, if we ignore the fact that it's awful AI slop where a guy tries to set fire to his own hands for 1 second, some of the claims there are wild. His campaign platform doesn't say anything about decriminalizing misdemeanors. Decriminalizing drugs and sex work actually helps them trapped by the system to being able to seek help rather than pushing them into the black market, which is more dangerous. And it is explicit Mamdani policy to keep police funding as it is and not to defund it. In the case of domestic violence, Mamdani's plan to create a Department of Community Safety is designed to replace police visits with social workers for non-violent mental health calls. He even mentioned it during the debate, that there should be a risk assessor to determine the right course of action on a case-by-case basis. But outside of policy concerns, this video is dripping in racism. Imagine the prompts you'd have to put in to get black man shoplifting in a keffiyeh or Zohran Mamdani eating rice with his hands, which is something the MAGA right have been mocking him for doing on social media. Real kind of gutter-level racist stuff here because eating rice with your hands is perfectly normal. But what else should we expect from a man who willingly offered to defend the genocidal Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu against the ICC charges of crimes against humanity? And if that wasn't bad enough, we've had another revelation that reveals just how depraved Cuomo really is. Cuomo, talking to a conservative radio host, Sid Rosenberg, this morning. God forbid another 9/11. Can you imagine Mamdani in the seat? Cuomo asks. He'd be cheering, Rosenberg says. Cuomo paused and chuckled before saying, that's another problem. There you have it. Cuomo essentially agreeing with the implication that Mamdani is a terrorist sympathizer. One can only assume why he might think such a thing. Ash, what did you make of this debate? And what does that AI video say about the kind of audience that Cuomo is trying to appeal to?
The thing about Andrew Cuomo is that he is a uniquely discredited candidate. So it doesn't surprise me that he's coming out with lowest common denominator, racist lies and smears. I mean, it doesn't surprise me about him at all. But what is shocking to me is that the establishment and big money interests couldn't find a better vehicle for their political ambition and program than a man who had to step down in disgrace and who's been dogged by sexual harassment allegations. I think there is a level of desperation to the way in which the attack lines on Zohran Mamdani have operated. So they've tried to do, not just soft, but tacitly encouraging of crime, anti-Semite, Muslim, why do you eat rice with your hands? That's the best they've got. And the thing is that it doesn't appear to be working, because the thing that you know about Cuomo is serial sexual harasser, allegedly. Thing you know about Curtis Sliwa is, I was shot 5 times by John Gotti. And the thing you know about Zohran Mamdani is like, okay, you're being called an anti-Semite, but your program of free bus travel, universal childcare, and rent controls, that really cuts through. So what you have is 3 candidates, but only one of them is talking about the kind of bread and butter material issues that New Yorkers are having to contend with. And, that's why Zohran Mamdani looks like the favorite to win. That's not to say that there aren't going to be significant obstacles and difficulties for Zohran Mamdani in office. I mean, thinking about the, entrenched interests and the various levels of the New York municipality that, they find themselves embedded in, he's going to have to deal with all of those things. Some of that will be direct confrontation. Some of it will involve some negotiation. And of course, all politicians, even very smiley, charming ones, like Zohran Mamdani, should be put under scrutiny and pressure. But these clowns, clearly not the ones to do it.
Couldn't say fairer than that. Thank you again, Ash, for joining me this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. And just say it again, it's ladies' night, the feeling's right, and Helena, such a great host.
Much appreciated. I learned from the best. We'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. Thank you everyone for tuning in. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.